Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to my global audience. Walter Cotton back at you with another installment of my Patriot Report. And as the opening indicates, this one contains breaking news because if you haven't gotten the memo as yet, the Minority Business Development Agency itself is now under threat of extinction because of a lawsuit that was filed by the three plaintiffs in this case that are finding the actions of establishing the Minority Business Development Agency to be discriminatory, to be violating their constitutional rights under equal protection. And the reason that I'm calling this breaking news is because there is precedence in law that suggests that if this case isn't properly defended, it's going to go the way of the Small Disadvantaged Business Contracting Program, emasculated to the degree that it is no longer viable. And we've got precedent in case law that I've been telling you all about since the president made that promise in Tulsa, right back in June, July of 2021, where he promised to increase the spending for small disadvantaged businesses to 15%. I asked the question then, in light of the precedents that has been set by Aldevra and Rothy versus DOD, how are you going to get there from here? I've even written several articles, which I've put links to in this particular video, that will lead you to the early questions that I asked of this administration, which were, one, does the president really have the juice necessary to implement a 15% increase or a 15% small disadvantaged business spending goal, including Black and brown people? And then I asked the question whether or not we were dealing with a Joe Biden that is woke and a man that has overcome the ills of his history. Are we dealing with a Barack Obama Joe Biden? Or are we still dealing with a Strom Thurmond Joe Biden? I asked that question because I woke up one night after this particular announcement in a cold sweat. And there's a link to that article also in the description of this video. And I asked the question, how will we know whether or not these laws, whether or not these goals, these intentions can be attained? And the voice that came to me, as clear as I'm speaking to you right now, said, if it is so, there will be evidence. And I've been following the evidence, and I've got to admit there's some murky evidence at best. But be all that as it may, our major hard problem is complicated by the Supreme Court decision that was made 3 years ago in the Byron Allen case against Comcast. I raised a issue at that point suggesting that people of color need to have a Hippocratic oath that they take when they start approaching laws and regulations that affect us all, because the unintended consequence of Byron Allen's effort to take his case before the Supreme Court was that it created a new precedence that set Black people back to the 1800s. And that precedence simply resulted from the fact that before the Byron Allen case, the measure to determine whether or not you have been discriminated against was likely to include race. That was the definition. That was the terminology. But as a result of the Byron Allen Supreme Court case, the justices came back and they said that now, in order for you to prove that you have been discriminated, there is the but for provision. And to say that in a way that a layman would understand it today, in order for you to prove that you have been discriminated against, you have to prove that but for your race, you would have gotten the concession. You would have gotten the contract. You wouldn't have been treated the way that you were treated. Why is all of this matter? All of this matters because we are in a very critical season where there's a wealth transfer opportunity that's on the table for Black and brown people that we need to marshal our forces together to ensure that we take maximum advantage of it. And I know this so well because I was involved in a similarly situated event where my fraternity, and you all know my fraternity is the disabled veteran business community, were faced with similar hard problems. And over almost 2 decades, we fought the battles in the courts, outside of the courts, to the Supreme Court to push the needle in contracting for our community to the point where we exceeded, right, the 3% goal in the shortest period of time. And I have another vested interest in this particular subject, as I said, because the Rothy case was found. It was adjudicated during my watch. It was adjudicated during a season when I was distracted by other matters, circa 2008, 2009. That's about when the Obama administration asked me to co-author the contracting section of the Jobs and Credit Act. And by the time I looked up from my workbench, that particular legislation or that particular court case had already been decided. Fortunately, we fast forwarded to today, and a very narrow defense is available for those people that are going to be defending themselves against the will lawsuit, which is what I'm calling it. There is a defense, and I'm preparing to support the defense from a litigation support perspective. But I have another dog in this fight. I have another dog in this fight because, like the advocate that I am, right, I was there in November 5th, as a matter of fact, of 2021, when we were briefing the then acting director of the Minority Business Development Agency about our good friend Keith Moore's strategy, who is the operator of the Federal Procurement Center, and his strategy for ensuring that we transferred the maximum amount of wealth to Black and brown businesses, small disadvantaged businesses, WMBEs, if you prefer that terminology. And unbeknownst to us, while we were there doing our briefing, that evening Congress went back into session and they voted the Infrastructure Act into law, which included that provision that made the Minority Business Development Agency a permanent agency under law for the first time in over 50 years. And we were excited, right? We were getting prepared for all of the deal flow that was going to come from that particular effort in concert with an administration that was championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, dare I say, we were uber excited. During all of that excitement, had an undertow of caution. And I had an undertow of caution because of my history with these matters, history with similarly situated matters. And I've written extensively in my LinkedIn article, my LinkedIn post. You should subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, about my concerns. I had some strong concerns in June, July of 2021 when President Biden made the initial 15% promise and included Black and brown people, because I was aware of Adirondack. I was aware of Al Devra. And when he included Black and brown people in that 15% promise, I asked the question, does President Biden have the juice? Does he have the authority to actually make this happen? The link to that article is in this, the description of this particular video. I also asked the question, which President Biden are we dealing with? Which Joe Biden are we dealing with? Are we dealing with the Barack Obama Joe Biden, right? The awakened, enlightened Joe Biden? Are we dealing with the church conversion Joe Biden, who has saw the errors of his legacy ways? Or are we dealing with the Strom Thurmond Joe Biden, who has a rich history of creating barriers and impediments for Black and brown people? I asked that question years ago. And now we're sitting in a situation where it seems like we have a goal that could be connected to unattainium. And as I look at the policies and procedures that are coming out of this administration, I don't see the kinds of actions that really support the utilization of the powers and tools that are within this president's good office. I see a lot of memos coming out of the office, but I, for one, know that if a presidential memorandum is not published in the Federal Register, it doesn't have weight of law. And I've scrutinized this president's executive orders, and the only executive order that I see that has any teeth associated with the 15% goal doesn't kick in until fiscal year 2024. And therefore, let's look at the Federal Register and talk about, what that thing means. And in this particular instance, I'm going to go interactive here so that I can take you back to the front end of what you're looking at here, because what you're looking at on the screen here is a ruling in the Federal Register that resulted from the Rothy versus DOD decision. And in this particular ruling, it spells out the adjustments. It spells out the changes that are going to be made in the DFAR. And for those of you who are not aware of the fact, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, whether it's the DFAR or the FAR or the VFAR for Veterans Administration, is the contracting officer's Bible. And from their perspective, if it doesn't show up in the FAR, it doesn't exist. In the DFAR, this particular ruling gave the contracting officers the treatment that they were supposed to employ towards the Small Disadvantaged Business Preference Program in DOD post Rothy versus DOD. And I'll put a link to this in this description as well, because it spells out all of the areas, all of the policies that are being pulled out of law, being pulled out as a result of the Rothy decision. And the cascading or domino effect in this instance is material, because there are things like the elimination of the HBCU, small disadvantaged business status. Now, that may not seem like a lot to you, but it was huge for the HBCUs, because under the previous regulation, they were able to be treated as small disadvantaged businesses by other agencies. As a result of this change in law, that was removed. The 10% price preference was removed. But one of the unintended consequences, similar to the unintended consequence that we got from the Byron Allen lawsuit, is that other agencies took note here. Other agencies said, well, guess what? If they're removing the Small and Disadvantaged Business Authority from the Department of Defense, well, we might as well do the same. So it was in this season that the SBA saw fit to take their contracting program for small and disadvantaged businesses and emasculate it. Now, they didn't get rid of it, right? All they did was emasculate it by taking the teeth out of the program, meaning they are allowing small disadvantaged businesses to self-certify, but there is no contracting program that allows the contracting officers to use set-aside or to use sole source contracting to get at those contractors. Ergo, there is no direct pathway that doesn't violate the constitutional precedents, the constitutional standards that have been set by Rothy versus DOD. And unfortunately, because of another unintentional consequence that came out of the Byron Allen lawsuit, we now have a situation where if we are going to prove what is necessary in order for there to be strict scrutiny and a narrowly focused solution that is in the best interest of the government, which is the measure that has to be proven now, man, we've got to go above the rim, whereas yesterday it was a lot more attainable. Why is all of this important? Well, all of this is important because this group that is coming after the ethnic community is also coming after the gender community as well. If you go and scrutinize this law firm and you look at the cases that they're currently promulgating, they're currently prosecuting against the Infrastructure Act, they have another case law that is focused on the gender consideration under that law. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody has a right to bring their cases before the court of jurisprudence, and to have them argued and have them discharged to the benefit of the community or the individual. In this particular instance, I believe that this effort has the unintended consequence of doing more harm than good. And the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention quite candidly is because it's important for us to do the right thing in our efforts to defend against this case. I'm one of these people that believes that the righter you do the wrong thing, the wronger you become. And I'm going to give you an example of some of the stuff that I'm seeing occur out there in the federal space. And wait a minute now. Are we in the right place here? Let me make sure that I get right to where I'm looking for here. Here we are. Okay. Thanks for accommodating me during that quick transition. But in this particular instance, what we're looking at is a circumstance where you've got a group of individuals that were pursuing some grants, some contracting dollars in some municipality. I'll put the link to it in the description to this video. And the commissioner, right, the county executive saw fit to cancel the award. And so, man, this looks like we're back in the 70s, right? They went to the pastor, they went to the bishop, and had the bishop produce a news conference where they're asking for the county executive to resign. Well, folks, let me be clear with you. As long as there is precedence in law, the next person coming in behind that individual is going to have to uphold the Constitution, the constitutional rights of the individuals that are bringing these kinds of cases. So it's incumbent upon us, right, to go ahead and change the game. And fortunately, in today's environment, there is an opportunity for us to do just that. Let me go ahead and pause that particular opportunity there, or that particular work, because I want to bring your attention to my QR code, right? I want to bring your attention to this QR code because in order for us to fight back this particular effort, we need to take a dual path. One path needs to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to provide the defense in this particular instance, the litigation support that's going to be required for them to accomplish the goal. And in order to do that, I can't say it in any other words, it's going to require money. It's going to require dineros. So those of you who are affected and who will be infected by this particular law, I'm asking you to dig in your pocket, man. I'm asking you to scan that QR code, and I'm asking you to make a contribution so that my tribe, so that my cohorts have the resources necessary to ensure this time, not on our watch, right? This time we don't get a Rothy versus DOD outcome that has the unintended consequences of further emasculating your ability, my ability, our ability to participate in the federal contracting space. But in addition to that, right, we have a solution, a strategy that can be employed today that nullifies, it mitigates to the maximum degree practicable any of these shenanigans. And the objective is to make that capability as freely available as possible. For those of you who are already in the federal contracting arena, there are a series of master classes that I have out there on federal contracting right now where I'm dealing with this specific issue. And who am I on the contracting arena? I'll tell you in no uncertain terms, I'm your favorite advisor's advisor. And I don't say that arrogantly. I'm just old enough to have been one of the early guys that was out there laying down this kind of information. So much so I remember in my brutal advocacy days, right? That's when we were driving that service-disabled veteran spending goal. I was fighting against the winds of change so aggressively. And I was doing it with without the measure of straw necessary, right, to create the bricks. And what I mean by that is, I was getting that done back in the days of blog talk radio, right? Before there was YouTube and all of these sophisticated social media approaches to disseminating information, we used the tools that were available to us to get the message out. And as a result of getting that message out, I can remember, because I was always a change agent. I'm always going against the conventional wisdom, if you will. But I was in D.C. Visiting Scott Dennison, who was at that time the director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization for VA. And I had been advocating for months, maybe even a little over a year, about the good news of how joint venturing could help our disabled veterans answer the hard problem that they were dealing with at that time. And I remember kind of sheepishly going into the headquarters of the Veterans Administration there at DC for my appointment, and the receptionist asked me to have a seat after I had signed in, and I had to go to the bathroom. And so I remember they pointed me to the direction of the bathroom, and I went in, did my business, and came out as a good retired service member would, and started walking back to the lounge area, the reception area where I was asked to be seated. And as I walked back, I started hearing clapping, a slow clap. And I just thought it was interesting, and I just kept going, and it kept getting louder and louder. And when I looked back, what I saw was the other members of the OSDEBU office, individuals coming out of their offices, staying in the hallway, giving me an applaud, standing ovation for the advocacy work that I was doing in helping to shift paradigms in the federal space. So there are a number of individuals out there that are in the federal contracting advising arena that kind of cut their teeth on the work that I did. They may have become emboldened because they saw what the old bald guy was doing. And I'm humbled by that, because they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. But in this season and right now, we need the adults at the table. Because what we're talking about is a movement that, if it isn't properly defended, will have the unintended consequence of erasing the Minority Business Development Agency. And you guys have heard that old adage, right? First they came for the socialist, and I wasn't a socialist, so I said nothing. Finally, they came for me, right? Everything in the middle is where you all stand. And our objective is to stop this particular onslaught before it gets started. And it's not going to happen without us coming together as a collective. So I need you to both provide me with your financial support in order to get this thing accomplished. And I need you to provide me with your physical support. So I'd ask you to come out and join the Ability to movement, which is the movement that you all know I put together some years ago. I didn't expect this purpose, right? I was using it to create generational wealth opportunities for people who wear my social uniform, but it is what it is. We are where we are. I'm going to encourage everybody that's within the sound of my voice, if you can't personally get involved, for you to pass this message on to someone who could, or someone who should be involved. Because at the end of the day, this train is already out of the station. The boulder is rolling down the hill, and we have no other choice but to do everything that's within our power to stop it before it crashes into our interest, into our needs. Well, folks, that's about all I have for this installment of my Patriot Report. In subsequent Patriot Reports, I'm going to actually take the case law that underpins the Aldevra, the Rothy case. I'm going to explain to you what they mean by equal treatment, right? What they mean by narrowly focused, what they mean by best interest of the government, so that you understand what the provisions of law are that we are defending against. As I said, looking left and looking right, that's about all I have for this segment. Please, if you're able, give us a donation because we're going to need your resources in order to fight that. If you can't do that, join us in our community of practice because your physical time and labor is an equal contribution that we can use. And I'm just going to leave it there, folks. We got a big challenge in front of us. It's a big, hairy, bald, audacious challenge, but it's one that I am up to. Until next time, this is Walter Cotton saying, I'm out.
You know we gon' keep the ball rolling, cause you know the show is going on. If you see them hating on it, do them dirty and brush them shoulders off, cause only drinks can fade. There's nothing to be afraid of. If you can't take it, we'll take it from here. We'll take it from here. So we'll take it from here. Gon' carry on, we gon' run it this year. I'm talking marathon. When they endorse, of course it'll triple. Triathlon. So if you up for the ride, then put your saddle on. We on the change from plaque nothing to platinum. Only plaque that I've seen yet is in back of my gums. On the market set, go set it from the get-go. I'm the purist, this is insurance. I only want the green, you can hold the gecko. Cause they all state the same shit. So I'ma coin a phrase to change it. We here now, and we ain't playing fair. Used to be poor, so as kings, we gon' reign here. I'm ahead of my class, while they sit in the back. I learn to master the charts, like I'm sitting the math. I know they felt the wrath when I came here. Perfecting my craft, they losing their grasp, so we gon' take it from here.